The wind howled through the abandoned streets of Vila das Sombras, a small town nestled deep within the mountains. It was a place time had forgotten, where the air was thick with the scent of decay, and the once vibrant homes now stood as crumbling relics of the past. In the heart of the town, under the dim glow of the moon, a figure emerged from the shadows, Sarah. Sarah had left this place 5 years ago, vowing never to return. But something had pulled her back, a force she couldn't explain, a whisper in her dreams that wouldn't let her rest. The night her fiancé, Lucas, had died in a car accident haunted her still. His face, his voice, his laughter, they were all etched into her mind, a constant reminder of the life they were supposed to have. But that life had been ripped away in an instant, leaving her with nothing but memories and the unbearable weight of guilt. She stepped onto the cracked pavement of the town square, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she approached the old church. Its doors were ajar, swaying gently in the wind as if beckoning her inside. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. The church had always been a place of solace for her, but now it felt different, ominous, as if the walls themselves were watching her. With trembling hands, she pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The pews were covered in a thick layer of dust, and the stained glass windows, once vibrant with color, were now dull and lifeless. At the altar, a single candle flickered, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the walls. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the silence as she approached the altar, her eyes drawn to the spot where Lucas had proposed to her on a warm summer evening. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but now, it was a memory tainted by tragedy. As she stood there, lost in thought, a cold draft swept through the church, extinguishing the candle. The sudden darkness sent a shiver down her spine, and she turned to leave, but the doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. Panic surged through her as she rushed to the doors, pulling at the handles with all her strength, but they wouldn't budge. She was trapped. Sarah, the voice was faint, barely a whisper, but it was enough to make her freeze. She turned slowly, her eyes wide with fear, searching the shadows for the source of the voice. There was nothing but silence. Sarah, this time, the voice was clearer, closer. It was a voice she knew all too well, Lucas. Her heart raced as she backed away, her mind reeling. It couldn't be him. He was dead. Lucas, she called out, her voice trembling. Is that you? The church was silent once more, but she could feel a presence, something cold and dark lurking in the shadows. She backed up against the altar, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Her mind was playing tricks on her, it had to be. But then she saw it, a figure emerging from the darkness at the far end of the church. It was tall and shrouded in shadow, but as it moved closer, she could make out the familiar features of the man she once loved. Lucas, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But something was wrong. The figure stopped a few feet away from her, and she could see it more clearly now. It was Lucas, but his face was twisted in pain, his eyes hollow and lifeless. His clothes were torn and stained with blood, and his skin was pale as death. He looked like a ghost, a tortured soul trapped between worlds. Sarah, he moaned, reaching out to her. She wanted to run, to scream, but her legs wouldn't move. She was paralyzed with fear as he reached out and touched her face with his cold, clammy hand. His touch sent a jolt of icy terror through her body, and she recoiled, stumbling backward. "Why did you leave me?" he asked, his voice filled with sorrow. I didn't mean to," she stammered, her mind racing. He stepped closer, his expression darkening. "You left me to die."
No.
"It was an accident. I tried to save you, but I couldn't. Her voice broke as she sobbed uncontrollably. "Liar," he screamed, his voice echoing through the empty church. The windows shattered, and the ground shook as if the very foundation of the building was being torn apart. The air grew thick with the stench of death, and Sarah could feel the darkness closing in around her. "You were supposed to be with me, Sarah. Forever," Lucas hissed, his eyes burning with an unnatural light. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she cried, collapsing to her knees. But there was no mercy in his eyes, only a deep, unrelenting hatred. He grabbed her by the arms and lifted her off the ground with an inhuman strength, his grip tightening as he pulled her closer. "You will be with me," he whispered, his breath cold against her skin. "Forever." Sarah screamed as the darkness consumed her, pulling her into a void where there was no escape. She could feel her life slipping away, the warmth of her soul being drained by the icy grasp of death. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The church was silent once more, the shattered windows letting in the pale light of the moon. The doors creaked open, and a cold breeze swept through the empty pews. But Sarah was gone, her presence erased from the world, leaving nothing behind but a lingering sense of dread and the faint echo of her final, desperate scream. And so, Vila das Sombras remained, a town lost in time, haunted by the spirits of those who could never leave. The church, once a place of worship, now stood as a monument to the past, where the living